Hi all, I have another amazing game to show you today from the TSAC Season 17 Super Final, Round 27. Stockfish playing white against Leela. The opening book is very interesting. E4 from Stockfish, fair enough. But B6, this is a bit of a surprising opening move. It's the O in the fence. Not so popular nowadays, but still quite interesting. D4, Bishop B7. We have Bishop D3, E6. So white is classically maintaining this pawn duo here in the center. We have Knight F3, and this is the end of the book. C5, and now Stockfish plays C3. Leela plays Knight F6. We have, after Queen E2, D5, E5, Knight FD7. Has Leela managed to trick Stockfish into some sort of French defense opening here? It does seem as though this could have arisen from the French defense. White castles. We have Knight C6. Bishop E3 is played. This is quite curious, it seems, to me at least, because usually in high-level over-the-board games, A3 has been seen here before. There's a caution about black's use of Knight B4 quite often. So, for example, Rook C8, Rook D1 follows the game Wesley So against Mamedyarov in an online game in 2019, which Wesley So went on to win in 55 moves. But it's been played in all sorts of serious time controls, A3. Another example, Rook C8, our friend from a previous video, Tiger Hillip Person, has played A3, and the opponent played C4, and that released the tension. In fact, white got a fantastic game soon after and managed to win quite quickly in 37 moves. So anyway, A3 basically has been seen in the over-the-board world quite a bit. So Bishop E3, not so much, just much lower rated players. We have actually Bishop E7 being played. Leela doesn't even test the omission of A3 here. So why is that? Why Bishop E7? If C takes D4, C takes Knight B4 to try and exploit that omission. It seems white has an interesting move in this position. I wouldn't really have thought of this too much myself. Bishop B5, after A6, Bishop A4, and in fact, after B5, putting the bishop right back on D1, not even B3. And it seems, white should get a good position, kicking the knight back, and the bishop can go back into that dangerous position on the diagonal, and should be a small edge for white. So it seems as though this move, is not that bad at all. Bishop E3 with this omission of A3. So anyway, Bishop E7. We have Knight E1. So is Stockfish going to play fantastically on the white side in a thematic fashion with F4 and F5 later, which against the French defense pawn structure is often effective? We have here black castling, Knight D2, Queen C8, and actually instead of F4, there's still the possibility of black, taking on D4 and Knight B4 at some points. White actually played H4 here. This sets a fairly obvious trap actually. If Bishop takes H4, then there's Queen H5 hitting H7 and H4. That pawn's immune, it seems. So we have A5. If we look at C takes D4 here and Knight B4, it seems white can play Queen G4 and not worry too much, in fact, about this. There are, dangerous threats emerging here, like Bishop H6. If King H8, then maybe Bishop E5 then, and this is going to be fine for white. Yeah, it's an interesting position tactically. So, okay, H4, Leela reacts with A5, and now we do have Queen H5, F5, we have G3. So this restrains that pawn a bit, gives G2 sometimes the knight to hop into F4. It supports H4. So we have A4, Queen goes back to D1. A3, Leela installs a queenside form pawn. Is it really dangerous here, or mostly harmless? B3, we have C takes, Knight B4. Knight D F3, white is not worried about Knight takes D3 here. And Leela doesn't even take it off. Leela plays Knight B8. If Knight takes D3, it seems white has many pleasant aspects to celebrate in a position here. It's not all about keeping the light square bishop. So, for example, this position, bishop g5, the dark squares in black's camp look a bit vulnerable. And in fact, white could try and control the c-file sometimes like this with an advantage. So there's different ways of playing the position. The light square bishop doesn't have to play a part in the evolution of this game, it seems. But Leela played knight b8, king g2, knight bc6, rook h1, queen d7, bishop g5, rook fc8. If bishop takes g5 here, you might ask, maybe h takes g. Well, it's forced, actually, because knight takes g5, there's knight takes d4, and that's really bad for white. So if this is forced, let's have a quick look. Say g6, this situation seems to be okay for white. Quite pleasant for white, in fact, this situation here. Black's a bit tied down without too much counterplay. So we have actually rook fc8, not committing to that structure. Bishop takes e7, queen takes h5, knight d8, queen d2, rook c7. Again, this volunteering the bishop. If it's taken here, white's got no real problems playing this position. Can put a form pawn in on h6, install the dreaded form pawn, the kingside form pawn, and can claim an advantage here, even if that pawn drops. Queen c8, and then knight takes e6. This is dangerous for black's structure, and white's going to have really dangerous dynamic potential there. So we have rook c7, bishop f1, rook ac8, knight d3, knight takes d3, bishop takes d3, h6, rook ab1, we have bishop c6, knight g1. This is a really interesting reroute maneuver, potentially going into f4. That's a really pleasant square here for the knight, usually in these types of situations, putting pressure on e6 and d5, holding h5. And you'll note here also that white in this territory has a potential break with g4, which would really radically transform the opportunities. But g4 has to be played at the right time. And I might as well draw your attention to this quote by Nimzowitsch: the threat is stronger than the execution. There's a constant threat, essentially, behind the scenes of g4. And I think when a player has a positional advantage, and an available strategic break in particular, that's a great example of when to time perfectly the strategic break where it's most painful for the opponent. So in many cases it's just going to be damaging to white right now, just losing a pawn for not much. But beware, g4 at the right time could be dangerous for black. We have for the moment queen g5 and queen b4, bishop e8. So black is hunting down white's advanced pawn and is offering a3 in return. The exchange of prisoners, as Nimzowitsch might say, that's another one of his expressions, where both sides exchange off their weaknesses. So he referred to that as the exchange of prisoners. So anyway, if queen e7, by the way, if the queen dared to come back, then white could actually take this pawn off and have, just be a pawn up. No compensation there. So black has to go in for this exchanging transaction. Knight e2, though, first is played, not queen takes a3. That move order is important. If queen takes a3, then bishop takes deprives this has been an effective move, because actually black could take here and after f4 reach a very, very dangerous position like this, for example, where black's really getting a big advantage, winning a piece, or if white wants to be mated, bishop f3, then there's queen takes g3. So there's all sorts of big dangers in these lines. So it's best to play this knight e2 before this possibility of bishop takes e2. Now we have bishop takes and the tempo insertion knight f4. So the rook and knight hitting the bishop, getting that tempo to really carry out the exchange of prisoners has been carried out. h5 for a3. We have queen e7, queen goes to b2, b5. This is interesting now. A3 has a positional threat actually. If white can play b4, sometimes establishing, say, a knight on c5, or even a rook if that permits, if black permits, would be a great outpost square in principle. We have that whole idea being suppressed with b4, but it gives white an outside pass pawn with a4. So let's imagine b4 isn't committed to by Leela and say king h8. In fact, here it's possible to play bishop takes b5. That's a weakness of the last move actually, going into a mighty fork potentially. So let's say then instead of king h8, bishop f7, again that just drops that. Let's say rook b8. Then here, if the rooks leave, then this situation, let's imagine the c5 square is sealed. White could actually perch a rook usefully on c5. So excuse the seemingly irrelevant, I just wanted to show you that this c5 square could be a good outpost square potentially for white here. Hence maybe there's some concern positionally for Leela to commit to b4. So it's committed to, it gives white this outside pass pawn, knight b7. And one thing about this, at least from black's perspective, it's nice to, it seems, put pressure on b3 sometimes. If there is an entry point on c3, this could be quite significant perhaps. One has to be aware of the b3 weakness. Rook bc1, knight a5. An exchange of rooks, queen b1, and remember this g4 all the time, it's a potential thing to execute, but the threat of it seems to be stronger than the execution now. Now in Indian chess I've often referred to it as high-level shuffling, and I've alluded to the idea that sometimes Leela uses high-level shuffling to get Stockfish to be aware of something terrible, and then Stockfish for some reason loses a pawn or the exchange and no one understands why. But I think the reverse can also be true, as is shown here, that white is in a better position. This g4 break is available to white, but there isn't a sort of pawn break for black to speak of. The extra space in the centre, this pawn wedge, g4 would be a liberating move in principle, and if white could use this move to open up g-file, open up diagonal, the pieces will be more liberated, dangerous and tactically effective. But when to actually play the move g4, it's all in the timing. This is very much, to me, a great example of a kind of killer application of Nimzovich's quotation, the threat is stronger than the execution. It's entangled in the high-level shuffling concept, where there's a configuration which is going to be very, very awkward, and at that moment, maybe that's the time you press your strategic pawn break button. So we see here rook c3, so this is at move 39, bishop c2, rook c6, and it seems both engines are dancing around here for a moment. They're both dancing around, but f3 betrays the idea a little bit more that maybe g4 in the not too distant future is going to be interesting and useful for white. So queen d3 here, queen goes back, bishop goes back, king goes here, unpinning and controlling the e3 square. So this seems to be an optimal use of resources, king f2, not just unpinning but controlling e3. So it's nice and secure, it seems, here at the moment. Rook c8, rook e1, rook c7, queen b1, bishop f7, rook h1, bishop h5, and some what you could call high-level shuffling, but white maintains that strategic break, which could really literally break the black position at the right time. So let's see though, more high-level shuffling, more high-level shuffling, more high-level shuffling. The king seems to be inviting queen g5 again, but the king's messing around, it seems, a bit. And it seems as though, is this game heading for a draw? Also though, time pressure could be creeping in for both sides. And here, so move 70, king f2, we have queen a7. Now queen d1, and it seems to me that if the queen just went back to e7, this seems fairly okay for black, as if g4 shouldn't be that dangerous. I'll just illustrate this. In fact, in the game, we saw bishop c6 here. Before we get into the main line of the game, let's have a quick look at 71, queen e7. The impact of g4 here, it does open up that diagonal, and it does open up the g-file, and this move queen g1 is relaxed about losing a pawn because knight f4, but king f8 is possible, and on queen g4, rook c6, it seems as though black should be able to hold things down there. And if white wants to be really adventurous with g4, with instead of knight f4 to play some kind of sacrifice to try and exploit both the g-file and the diagonal, then black could take this piece, and this check is not working. The rook would have to retract. There's no rook f6 check here, as there might be in other lines I'm about to show you, because there's this bishop f7 as a defensive resource, and white's just losing material and losing horribly. Now compare this to the game continuation with bishop c6. This one liberating trump card for the g-file and the diagonal is very, very interesting here in this particular situation. The bishop has gone out of diagonal duty for bishop f7. The queen is an unprotected piece on a7. It's okay, it's holding down a bit the d4 square, so the knight can't move. It doesn't seem that implausible, black's move, bishop c6. Now, if you look at certain online sites that have analysed this position with lower depth stockfishes, Chessbomb, for example, has given g4, which is played, a question mark move, as though it's a mistake. It's actually a really, really deep tactical move. It's a brilliant breakthrough move. At this point in the game, it's a brilliancy move after bishop c6. It's absolutely brilliant. It makes for me the whole game worth going over just for this move. Just here, just now, in this particular configuration. It's absolutely brilliant tactically. F takes g4 is played. So it's breaking open the diagonal, this strategic break, and it's also opening up the potential for a semi-open file on the g-file. Queen g1, so giving up a pawn. G takes f3. Here, if Lila plays rook f8, white just grabs back the pawn with interest that things have been opened up to the black king. And, for example, this is just starting to be dreadful for black. If queen f7, there's a few samples here, it's all going to be dreadful. Sorry, rook f8 as an example, that's what I meant. Then knight f4, or yeah, it's just white's achieved that strategic break with a lot of pressure now on the black position coming up. And if g3, then say as an example taking on b3. In fact, here rook b1 might be good, and then bishop f5. This is the major tactics with the loose piece, rook being exploited, or e6 dropping. Yeah, it's just collapsing for black in these lines. So this liberating move, g4, it's a brilliant breakthrough move in this particular configuration. F takes is played, queen g1, g takes, and the point is here, the brilliant point. Can you guess? White play here if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. So absolutely superb tactical points being made by Stockfish. So white play rook takes h6. Yeah, rook takes h6. So Lila actually plays bishop e8. If f takes e2, this is just absolutely sublime tactically. Bishop h7 check and rook h4 holds d4, and we're going to have a discovered check against the king now. And say check here, king takes, check, king e3. This discovered check is going to happen. Say bishop f5, and then bishop takes e6, and then rook h8. Queen g7 is crashing through tactically. It's absolutely amazing. And there's another amazing line here. Instead of f takes e2, sorry, here on king f7, because you might think, well, don't walk into a discovered check. Can you see what white plays in this position, in this particular position? So it seems as though black's hitting d4. White needs to be very fast here and has a very fast tactical move here for 100 points. What does white play here? Okay, rook f6 is possible. So for example here, this is very forcing winning material. And if we go back there, if we look at g takes, then queen g6 and actually picks up the queen with advantage. And by the way, earlier, if king f8, again here rook f6 is working. This picks up the queen. So there's all these fun variations, it seems, after rook takes h6, which just didn't exist when the bishop was on e8. So this strategic break has really broken, it seems, the black position here to some extent. Bishop e8 is played by Leela, and now king takes f3. And it doesn't really matter about this b3 pawn. It's a bit irrelevant compared to black's king safety. Rook h3 is played. You'll note that the knight and queen hold d4 from here, actually. Knight d2 check, king g2, we have knight e4. It looks as though black's creating some trouble, right? If queen f7 was played, then the huge battery move, queen h1, threatening mate in one there. And queen d1, and now rook f3 is unfortunate for pinning the queen to the king there. So knight e4 was tried, queen h2, this battery. So it wasn't just the g file, it was the h file as well. Queen takes a4, check, rook h7. Yeah, it seems king safety has been compromised. We have queen c6 here, knight f4, bishop f7, queen g4. And this is absolutely brilliant as well in its own right. This pressure, this common square pressure, leading to Leela playing g5, which is a weakening move in theory, but how to exploit it. Another amazing 500-point tactical move. Can you guess what white played in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. So white play here. It is a wonderful tactical demonstration. Okay, queen f3, just threatening lots of nasty discovered checks. Well, especially knight g6 and queen f7. So that's taken. Queen takes f4. But now this diagonal has been ripped open. By winning that piece, the black king is even more exposed. We see queen c7. If queen e8, then bishop takes e4 and queen f6 threatens rook h8. And black can only spectate there. Is going to get mated with rook h8. So queen c7, check. And this is winning. That diagonal has been compromised as mentioned. And queen h4 is very unpleasant. After king d7, bishop b5 is winning the queen here. The king has no escape squares. The queen has to go in front. Bishop takes. King takes. Yeah, if rook takes, that seems to run into nasties. That looks pretty nasty. So, yeah, king takes. The rook is taken, so I don't think black's passed pawn is enough here, somehow. And it's all over. Bond shouting. So, this game shows that also Stockfish can play the waiting game for the opponent to crack. I think it's... The quotation has made me think a little bit more philosophically about the quotation. I don't know about you guys, but I think, for me, it seems if you've got the better position with a strategic pawn break, that's the time to start shuffling those shuffling those cards, waiting around, seeing the optimal configuration, the time to pounce on the opponent. In over the board chess, I've seen this, my good friend Alex playing this Grandmaster waited for Alex to be very low on time before playing strategic pawn break. That button needs to be pressed at the very moment of unfortunateness, maximum unfortunateness for the opponent, both in terms of how much time they've got left in the position. And here, it's just a very, very deep tactical move, though. When it's played, it really seems to work like clockwork precision. So, fans of precise watches might like this tactical engineering precision of this game with the G4 break timed perfectly, it seems. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this game as much as me, from a tactical perspective, if nothing else, and positional, I would say. Okay, so if you want to invite me for a game, kingscrusher.tv, register there and I'll be able to invite you for a game, or bit.ly/chessworld, register there, same thing. kingscrusher.tv/discord is my Suave chat channel if you want to check out that. Join the chat there, suggest games, etc. There's playlists bit.ly/Leela Chess, bit.ly/Stockfish Chess, bit.ly Magna Carlsen Chess, etc. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares, appreciated. Thanks so much.